This episode contains descriptions of death, child molestation, incest, rape, mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional abuse. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome, my pretties. Come in. Have a seat.
Name's Autumn.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Don't You Know, Season 2, Episode 2.
Today we're covering the case of Papa Pilgrim and the Alaskan Hale family cult.
Ooh, woo, 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 cult.
In 2002, Robert, Papa Pilgrim Hale, would be caught in a legal battle with the National Park Service for his plans to bulldoze a road to his 410-acre ranch in the Alaskan wilds, known as Hillbilly Heaven. Pesky Wrangell St. Elias National Park was in the way of easy access to the Hale family ranch. It is illegal for any private citizen to in any way modify federal lands. This did not bear well with Pilgrim, as he had an ego the size of Saturn and would not let anything stand in the way of his wants. After all, he was especially chosen by the Christian God as his earthly vessel.
Was he?
He was, yes, according to him.
Was he, though? I question that.
Everybody questioned that, except him. Obviously, federal government doesn't recognize self-proclaimed messiahs and charged him with the felony modification of the federal lands. He lost the case in both the appeals court of San Francisco and the U.S. Supreme Court. During his legal battles with the National Park Service, Pilgrim would see the vise of dominance over his family loosen. In 2005, the elder Hale children would flee their servitude, seeking refuge in the welcoming arms of their neighbors. They would cautiously reveal the many tortures they were subjected to by their father: mental, spiritual, emotional, physical, and sexual abuses. Though they felt as if they were betraying their patriarch, the need to escape the lifelong hell in which he ruled was stronger than the waning love they had for this devil. He would be arrested and jailed in September 2007 for his crimes, succumbing to his poor health a short 8 months later. Preacher Robert Bobby Butterfly Sun star Papa Pilgrim Rom Hale would defend his actions to his dying breath. Who was the tangled and tattered soul that was Robert Hale? I'm glad you asked. On April 7th, 1941, Robert Bobby Hale, one half of a twin set, he and his brother Billy were born to Virginia and Ivy Hale. Raised in Fort Worth, Texas, they would run with the more affluent crowd of the Arlington Heights High School. Their father was a former college football star, scouted by the Redskins, but turned away that opportunity to remain in Texas. He had another dream to pursue, and that was to join the Federal Bureau of Investigations, better known as the FBI. He would go on to become an agent of the FBI's Dallas division and a good friend of J. Edgar Hoover. A rolling stone gathers no moss, and neither did Ivy Hale. Done with the suits, he would later become chief of security at General Dynamics fighter jet plant. Though he was active in the community, he was absent from home. He would spend his time giving to charities and making a name for himself in the local newspapers. His sons, however, did not receive so much attention, and his wife even less. In fact, Ivy was having an affair with her best friend.
Ooh.
Right? Best friend, my ass. His friends. His sons were aware of this affair, and he forced them to keep it secret.
Ugh. Dirty.
Right? Of course, his wife did find out somehow, which led to divorce and Ivy marrying his mistress. They enjoyed a brief happily ever after until his heart attack in 1971. He was a big dude, 250 pounds, 6-foot-ish, burly football player. With Ivy being a fan favorite in Fort Worth and rubbing elbows with various law enforcement and government officials, his children could do no wrong. Bobby, as Papa Pilgrim, would go on to brag to his own children that he never even got a speeding ticket because of how well connected his father was.
What a flex.
Yeah, right?
But also, not a flex, because that's very privileged.
Privileged, you don't learn how to hold yourself accountable, and we'll see how that affects him in later life. I would surmise that being handsome, wealthy, and having a rather powerful father, Bobby was arrogant and entitled, a theme he would never venture far from throughout his life. His father often swept his troublemaking under the rug the few times he would be home to sort out any family matters. Bobby was a trained boxer who liked to drink and fight, leading to a broken nose, which was the only subtle difference between him and Billy when they were young. They would trade places, often pulling hijinks at school and in town. Their pranks would land them in the Episcopal prep school for a year before returning to Arlington Heights. Being that Bobby grew up in wealthy Fort Worth, and through his father's connections, he would rub shoulders of the people who would go on to become famous. One such instance, his schoolmate was John Duschendorf, better known as John Denver, a famous singer, along with other singers such as Sean Phillips and Delbert McClinton. Another famous name to attend this high school was none other than Lee Harvey Oswald, who had just moved to the poorer part of town with his mother. The most notable was the daughter of John Connolly, a lawyer and politician, and future Texas governor. When Bobby was 18, he would fall head over heels for Kathleen Connolly. She was gorgeous, with chestnut hair and big brown eyes. Smart and popular, she was just 15 years old when Bobby would woo her into his tight embrace. Kathleen started sneaking out to meet Bobby and distancing herself from her family. This was strange behavior for Kathleen, as she was the eldest and the pride of her family. Kathleen, or KK as Bobby would call her, knew him socially through the families and began tutoring him. They would soon start dating, though Bobby was a shit boyfriend, purposefully making her jealous and then gaslighting her into believing him carrying books for other girls meant nothing other than being a gentleman and that she was being crazy.
God, I hate me a good gaslighter.
Right? He was a real sweetheart, though. When Kathleen was 16, she was seen being sick at school by a teacher. Of course, this was irrefutable proof that Kathleen was pregnant, so the teacher called her parents while they were away in Washington. They immediately returned home to interrogate Bobby and Kathleen, who insisted nothing was amiss.
Did you know that this says boo on it?
Yeah, my grandma Delmy.
I was stitching.
Cute, right?
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
No, you're good. They grounded Kathleen and barred Bobby from dating her, as if that means anything to teenagers. Kathleen was headstrong, determined to prove to her parents that she wasn't ruining her life, that she and Bobby were in love and meant to be together. Despite her mother's tearful protest, she would leave with Bobby in March 1959 to elope in Ardmore, Oklahoma, where they could legally wed. Pregnant, because they were lying the whole time, and married, the young couple would soon settle in a dingy apartment in Tallahassee, Florida. Bobby got a job in a shipyard to support his lovely wife and child. Obviously, the parents are not okay with this arrangement, and the fathers quickly flew to Tallahassee to convince the children to come home. Bobby and Kathleen were warm in their welcome, but they refused to return to Texas, insisting that they were old enough and could make their own way. Defeated, the fathers would leave. Not before Connolly interviewed the landlord. He was saddened to hear that Kathleen and Bobby often fought, and Kathleen would either stay at a hotel for a night or sit with the landlord crying. Hale and Connolly drove back to Texas without their children, the loneliest road they ever drove.
That's sad.
It is.
Crying without your kids. Or crying about your kids without your kids.
Yeah. Well, it gets sadder.
Oh, yay.
April 28th, 1959, Kathleen Connolly was dead. Just a week after her father had tried to bring her home, the parents rushed to Tallahassee on a private jet. Bobby was held in protective custody for threatening to jump off his apartment building roof over the agony of losing his young wife. Now, the official story, as told by Bobby, is that they had a real blowout over a bathtub ring, and he felt that Kathleen had not cleaned properly. In fact, he said it wasn't really even a fight, more of a discussion. He was upset and decided to leave to cool off, disappearing overnight. Bobby searched all over town for Kathleen, though he suspected she was hiding out at the landlady's apartment, which she might have been because when later interviewed during the investigation, the landlady would claim that Kathleen was thoroughly frightened. Bobby testified before the inquest that when he returned to the apartment at noon, Kathleen was sitting on the couch with a shotgun under her chin. He was shocked, stating that he didn't even know she knew how to load it. He dropped to his knees and begged her not to shoot it, but she wouldn't listen. In a last-ditch effort, Bobby would hit the gun from her hands where it would land against the wall. He wasn't even sure if it went off before or after he hit it. What was certain was that Kathleen was dead. This was a high-profile case, splashed all over the newspaper. Though her death was highly suspicious, neither family was interested in a drawn-out investigation. Despite there being no fingerprints on the gun, and the wound being behind her right ear, the coroner ruled the death an accident and the case was closed quickly. Whether Bobby was guilty or not, he was certainly devastated. Bobby Hale would travel west in early 1962, keeping mostly to himself, except for one instance where he and his twin brother would pop up on the FBI wanted files. He was thought to be one part of a two-man job that trashed the alleged mistress of President Kennedy and mob boss Sam Giancana.
Ooh, you don't want to be fucking with the mob.
Or the government.
I feel like the government is just its own type of mob.
Oh, it absolutely is.
But like either one, I'm good. I'm good.
No thanks. Two men were seen sneaking into Judith Campbell's apartment, trashing the place. They were identified through the license plate of a powder blue Chevrolet Corvette registered to I.B. Hale. Bobby and Billy matched the description of the two men seen entering the apartment through the sliding glass balcony door. Now, why this is going down is an episode all its own, but the gist is I.B. was chief of security at General Dynamics at the time. It's speculated that Seymour Hersh, investigative reporter, that General Dynamics was on a tough times and wanted to extort President Kennedy with the evidence gathered from the break-in. Between I.B.'s death, Billy being MIA, and Bobby not talking, Hersh was left with nothing but dead ends, conceding to the ruling of the congressional hearing that there was no collusion between the White House and the company. This case and the Hale sons' involvement with the FBI will continue to be shrouded in mystery. There are some loose connections to the assassination of President Kennedy, like Virginia Hale, their mother, getting Oswald the job at the welding place as she worked for the Texas Employment Commission. IB was also a former FBI agent, good friends with shady folk, allegedly. Anyway, as I said, that's a whole different cup of tea.
Yes, we're only sipping on one right now.
Trying to keep it concise, 15 pages. There's so much that could have just gone into this. From 1962 to 1974, Bobby was wandering around the southwest coast living off of his father's legacy, jumping from young woman to young woman and state to state. One night in New Orleans diner, Bobby and his girlfriend, from the moment Bobby and his girlfriend of the moment had dinner with Charles Manson and his cult. This was a short year before the cult would murder Sharon Tate.
Ugh.
At the time, Bobby had admired Manson and resonated with the nonsense that came from that man.
That's a whole man. We gotta get a case on him.
Yeah, that's
He's a whole
fucked up. Talking about
I
cults.
enjoyed talking about that cult. I know it's done a lot, but Charles Manson is a classic cult leader.
Yeah.
And
all these cult leaders. I don't see how
not Warren Buffett, Jeff
from the Branch Davidians.
Yep.
That guy. I don't remember his name, but
I feel like it's really
Jim
close.
Jones.
Warren. I think Warren is somewhere in there. I think is it Jeff Warren? That doesn't matter.
Look it up. Anyway,
those people.
We're talking about this cult.
This
family cult. Where did I leave off at? Wooed by the nonsense from Manson, he continued on his way taking copious amounts of LSD and marijuana, hopping from hippie commune to hippie commune. In the summer of 1974, Bobby, now 33, would sink his claws into Karina Rose Breezer. They met at a hot spring in California. Bobby was tripping hard that summer, saying that the Lord had come to him and told him that Karina would bear him 21 children. 21 was a considerable number to Bobby, as it was a multiple of the sacred number 7. Karina was also just sweet 16, as was Kathleen when Bobby decided to ruin her life. Time was short between meeting Karina and getting her pregnant. They moved around, finally settling in a commune in the foresty hills of the Oregon coast, Sunny Ridge. Here Bobby would take it upon himself to teach transcendental meditation. Their stay here was brief, as Bobby would go on to lecture in Europe with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi about transcendental meditation. Bobby was quite impressed with himself, you see. That was until his heroes fell when he overheard them talking about how to keep the crowds coming by promising cosmic consciousness. He said he took the Maharishi limo right to the airport and left for home. Disillusioned, he would evolve his beliefs into a mix of Christianity and planet worship. Back in the day, talk of the town was a comet was heading for Earth, Hutik. In 1973, they would flee to South America to avoid the catastrophe that would ensue in this fallout. During this time, they would travel to the coasts of Bolivia and Ecuador, consuming vast amounts of LSD and having spiritual experiences that would convince Bobby he was a prophet himself. This whole time he was having people call him Rom. Karina was struggling through her teen years. Being a young mother of divorced parents, raised in a wealthy Beverly Hills, she rejected the mainstream, instead choosing to live a simple life off the land. She was perfect prey for Bobby Rom. Karina and Bobby would pick names for each other. He would call her Sunlight and she would call him Firefly. And they took the surname of their car, the Sunstar. They would name their first daughter Butterfly. You'll see throughout this case that Bobby just loves to up and rename himself and his family at a whim. In the early years, Firefly Rom Bobby worked hard to give his wife and daughter a simple but happy life, making their squatting as comfortable as possible, but his temper was never far away. One night, Karina recounts how he had flown into a rage and threw burning hot coals at her and Butterfly as they sat nude around the campfire. She threatened to take the baby to the hospital for her third-degree burns until Bobby Rom Firefly apologized and convinced her that they could care for the injuries, giving her some spiel about how he was a tortured soul and did things in his past life that he can't forgive himself for, so it all gets heavy sometimes. Blah, blah, blah. Where I'm sure that this is true, he can still go fuck himself.
Period.
Shortly after this, Bobby would take his family back to Fort Worth to visit his brother. There they would attend a Baptist service that would change Bobby forever. He found Jesus, letting his light cast the shadows from his soul, vanquishing the demons in his mind. He emptied his bag of marijuana in a field, cut his hair, and shaved his beard, and never looked back.
Don't waste the good kush like that.
It was ditchweed back then, don't worry about it. To make a long story short, Bobby and Karina Rose would travel from place to place with their band of children, living off the land and their neighbors. At one point, they would end up on a ranch that would become owned by Jack Nicholson. As would be the Hale family MO, they overstayed their welcome in the community, caught stealing from neighbors, and dipping out on debts. The neighbor even wrote a letter to the Nicholson estate about the grievances they had with the Hales over property lines. The estate settled, saying that the Hales hadn't broken any contract or any laws, so that they were welcome to stay, but that the Hales got the hint and moved on. All the while, Bobby was burying himself in Bible study, becoming stricter, living as close to simple as possible, almost primitive. No baby dolls for his daughters, wife barefoot and pregnant running the household. His country Rose, as he began to call her, followed him with every change, submitting to her husband like a good wife should, to the point of failure to protect. Bobby Hale would scold his family and tell them that they would burn in the fires of hell if he didn't follow his command and live life as he saw fit. He would physically correct the boys and bathe with his daughters.
Beep, 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 red flag.
They just thought it was a carnival. The kids didn't know any better, and Karina Rose was thoroughly brainwashed. I mean, you beat and isolate somebody for so long. Yeah. He would also beat his wife in front of the children, gaslighting them into believing it was their fault because they had somehow transgressed him. Pious and pitiful he was, charming to outsiders and a devil to his clan. Ever the nomad, Bobby would carve his way into the Alaskan wilderness, settling in the old mining town of McCarthy. This is where his grand plan would begin to unravel. As was the norm, the Hales blew into town, charming the townsfolk with song and dance. Imagine 15 kids circling around their various instruments like fiddles and flutes, playing a jaunty tune as they welcome you to their arrival. Going by Papa Pilgrim now, he wooed the McCarthyans into undue comfort. His children were well behaved, they lived by God and the land, and all they wanted was to keep to themselves. They saw the land for sale and worked up a deal with the owner and set to the task of making it home. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details, but it was $30,000 down, which they had saved through sales and such throughout the years. They also accepted a stipend from the government, some $1,300 each person of the family for settling the land. This kept them going, along with ignoring the rules and hunting out of season, stealing from neighbors, and racking up debts in the town stores and through favors. In the confines of his homestead, he would deny the children formal education, or really any education at all. They were meant not to question him, and he was meant to teach them by the conduct of the Bible. He would do this through his own convoluted interpretation of the scripture, manipulating passages to justify his putrid actions. His elder daughter, once Butterfly, then Elizabeth, and now Elisheba, was devastated to find out her government name was Butterfly Sunstar when she got her driver's license. It was also Elizabeth before that when she was younger, and the Hale children are as follows.
She didn't know?
She didn't know that she was born Butterfly Sunstar. That's like on her birth certificate. That's her legal name. So that's what's on her driver's license. After a time, or when he, threw off the shackles of being a hippie, he named her Elizabeth. But then when he got more into his Christianity and they started picking names from the Bible, he settled on Elisheba. That's the only name she's really known. Her Hale children are as follows: Hosanna, Jerusalem, Israel, Moses, David, Joshua, Joseph, Jonathan, Elisheba, Noah, Abraham, Psalms, Lamb, and Bethlehem. There was also a miscarriage that I believe they named Grace. All in all, throughout his life, Pilgrim, including the miscarriage, did get his 21 children. The one prophecy he had come true in some sort of way. Pilgrim was a monster. If one of the family angered him, he would whip them until they bled, on and off for hours. He would make Elisheba beat the younger ones, as she was his favorite, though he would play her younger sisters against her, telling her that if she had a problem with him, she could leave and her sister could take her place. One night he was so upset that the family was questioning him that he beat the 2-year-old Jonathan, giving him a bloody nose. And a broken. Another heinous abuse to note is Papa Douche Canoe brainwashed his family into a suicide pact. He had manipulated them into refusing to live without him and instead join him in the kingdom of heaven. Bobby Pilgrim thought very highly of himself. He couldn't imagine a world going on without his glorious presence. He used the end of the world as a method of control as well, teaching his children that they needed to live by his word in order to be right with Jesus and make it past the pearly gates. The children in Karina lived in constant anxiety of being condemned to hell if they displeased their father. They suffered his temper, often being beaten and lectured with bastardized interpretations of the Bible.
Not the first time I've heard that.
No.
Sadly.
Unfortunately, it's
way too common.
Way too common. When Elisheba was 18, Papa Bobby would begin to coerce her into intercourse, using scripture to manipulate her into believing that it was okay, but it is what God wanted, that she was helping her mother conceive because she was old and withered and Papa wasn't attracted to her anymore. It was legal because she was of age. The incest had nothing to do with it. Elisheba was forced to keep the secret, being manipulated in every way possible by her father. The entire family was. This was all happening behind closed doors and would never have been revealed if it hadn't been for the brave Elisheba. One night, as they bathed together in their long underwear, he rubbed her in places that gave her new feelings. He instructed her not to dress in dry clothes, but to put on her robe and get in the back of the pickup truck where he sometimes slept. She saw that he had a purpose in uncovering her nakedness, the intent to make her feel the need to respond to him in a physical way. She could hardly bear the shame and guilt this laid upon her heart, but he insisted that it was right before God, that God had sent him dreams and confirmations about it ever since she was a baby girl in the desert. All young women went through this, he said. It would be many years before she could speak of that first night in the back of the pickup, or how a few days later he followed her into the woods and forced her to the ground and tore off her clothes and began pawing her like an animal. It was so disgusting that she pushed him off and ran away. After that he changed, becoming kinder to Elisheba, consulting her on family matters, elevating her to a place higher in the family. She would call him Lord, but was bitter towards him, starting arguments and speaking her mind. This, of course, was unacceptable. The pilgrim would take his anger out on his sons, whipping them and telling Elisheba that she was the only one that could deliver them mercy, if she didn't reject her father's sexual advances. One time in the high wilderness, he sent her in search of 2 lost donkeys and told her to watch as well for a 7-point elk horn. He had seen the horn in a dream as a sign that God blessed their being together. She crept through the woods, terrified the antler would suddenly appear. It never did. The next day, Joseph rode into camp with an elk horn that he had found. It had only 6 points, but Papa showed them where he said a 7th had broken off. Elisheba saw bitterly that he was making it up. She was too afraid to say anything, but whether it was fear of her earthly or heavenly father, she could not have said. She cried when she was with him and reminded him that it was important to the Lord that she remain a virgin. He told her she was still a virgin because he was always careful not to penetrate fully, careful to spill his seed outside of her. Everything would turn out fine, he said, as she prayed for a perfect husband to be waiting in the kingdom of God, a virgin like her without sin. But it didn't sound to Elisheba like he wanted to let her go to the kingdom of heaven, because Papa reminded her the family's prayer that they will all live together or die together with the coming of the Lord. When his time came, he said, even if the others were not called, he prayed that she would be ready to come along. During their travels, they would go back and forth to Texas, that is until John Connolly became governor in 1962. Rumor has it that Texas Rangers were summoned to tell Hale to get the hell out of Texas. Pilgrim would later deny this happening, however, he denies everything but his own ego. And as one who has such an ego, he didn't let anyone dictate his travels. His journey would take him and the family all over the American Southwest, honestly getting into some crazy adventures. In the summer of 97, Billy the twin would visit the Hales. They were camped out in the Pesco Hills with their sheep and ravens. Elisheba thought that maybe he was there to rescue her, but he was banished before anyone could blink. The Pilgrim had Joshua and Joseph take him into the woods and leave him there. Billy would sleep under a boulder until the next morning, where he would find refuge in a cabin to regroup at. After that, he left for South America without a word, and this is where he would spend the rest of his life. While Pilgrim was banishing his brother for whatever made-up reason, he was also running from the law. There was a case against Preacher Pilgrim, as he had finally coaxed non-family members into his little cult. They were traveling through New Mexico when Rose would give birth to Psalms. This would garner sympathetic attention from a young couple with an 11-year-old daughter. The other mother fell in love with the simple Hale lifestyle and holy mission. With stars in her eyes and a soapy brainwash, she and her daughter ran off to live with the Pilgrim and his family. Her husband called the authorities, who staked out the arroyos and searched the national forest by helicopter.
Damn. They went all out for her.
Hale had kind of made a name for himself throughout the towns. People are at first charmed, like, oh, just nice, simple life, like nomadic Amish people.
Right.
And then, they would see the wealth and how the children didn't know, normal things that children in
are supposed to know.
Yeah.
To develop correctly.
Yeah. The lack of social skills, formal education. Her husband called the authorities, who staked out the arroyos and searched the national forest by helicopter. The runaway wife sought on a charge of custodial interference, and a flyer was distributed that had trumpeted a much bigger concern. We fear this is a satanic cult. Mother Elizabeth does not have legal custody of the child. We are afraid that she is being drugged. This cult could be a part of a larger group that could leave out the level of movie star involvement or even higher. We have evidence that could indicate a possible Jean-Benet Ramsey type situation evolving.
Interesting comparison.
Right? None of this was of concern to Pilgrim. He was in fact elated that he was being persecuted for his beliefs. This validated him in only a way he could understand. He renamed his followers Naomi and Ruth. Rose and the youngest children would hide their guests in the end-of-the-world cliffs, while a posse ransacked the Rainbow Cross cabin. The chase went on for months as the family raced around in their fleet of hillbilly vehicles. They would end up leaving the area altogether and hiding out in Idaho. It didn't take long for the young mother to leave of her own free will after less than a year. She reconciled with her husband, and no charges were brought up on the cult family.
That's good. I'm happy she was able to reconcile her family.
Yeah. God knows what happened.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to know.
To wake her up to this.
But I can imagine.
I didn't get too much on that case, just that they were reconciled, no charges were filed, and
I can imagine that was an extremely hard thing for the husband to do, to have your wife and child run away from you, and then
with a guy that
and have to understand what manipulation went through that decision and be okay with taking it back.
Yeah.
Like that's just a lot. So I'm glad they were able to work that out.
Me too. And get away from the
for sure. Get away from
here. Excuse me. This further pushed Pilgrim to his decision to flee Alaska. In early 1998, they would prepare the family for the big move, crowding into their Alaskan bus refitted to be a camper, making their way to Fairbanks. They settled in the town of McCarthy, buying land in 2002 near Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Children, barefoot and polite, would gather up their fiddles and drums and put on an impromptu concert for the townsfolk. Music was one reprieve from the torture that Pilgrim allowed. The children would learn to sing shanty tunes and gospel songs. With their simple clothes and biblical names, no one would suspect what was going on behind closed doors. The town was charmed and eager to accept the Hales as eccentric but lovable mountain folk.
Well, I have to accept them. I don't accept my neighbors.
Yeah, but the Hales relied on their neighbors for everything. Like, they farmed and they hunted, but they didn't, follow the rules. It's like, hey, I need gas. Can you give me some gas? I'll pay you back, blah, 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 blah. They needed the town to accept them. That, and narcissists love that attention. They want to harm people into believing that they're not as disgusting as they actually are.
Okay.
He definitely needed to feed his ego. Slowly building his commune with funds from the government, his children's music, and his janky tour guide service, Pilgrim felt his commune needed a better road to travel on. Far be it from the National Park Service to get in his way, Pilgrim began carving his road to hillbilly heaven through the federal lands. Park rangers would begin investigating. Of course, Pilgrim was hostile, refusing to cooperate and let them survey and report the damage that he had done to the national park. Battling illness, the law, and the slow unraveling of his family, hillbilly heaven was becoming hillbilly hell. Pilgrim would exploit his children's passions for music, encouraging them to perform hillbilly music in concert halls to raise money for his fight against the National Park Service.
You can't see it right now, but Haley's wearing a hillbilly shirt. It says hillbilly on it.
It does. I wore it specifically for this recording. This would catch the attention of political activist known as Cushman. He was the one to propose the fundraising concert. He was moved by the Pilgrims' progress and rebellion against the ever-encroaching government to dominate the land of the people. He even moved the family into his home for a short time, sending more of the children south to join the band. The schemed work, and many people stood behind Hale's values and rights to work the land as a free man. As Pilgrim gathered sympathy from the crowd, he was abusing his family in the most heinous ways. Pitting Elisheba against her younger sister Jerusalem since her birth, Pilgrim wasted no opportunity to tell Elisheba that she could easily be replaced by her sister and be reduced to a place of servitude inside the family. So she best bite her tongue and be grateful for her status. Jealous and bitter, Elisheba would make life miserable for everyone in the family. In one instance, young Abraham caught his finger in a generator, severing it at the last joint of his middle finger. Ever the paranoid asshat, Pilgrim would hide his children away, fearing social services would take them when the doctors noted several lateral welts over the child's back. He had them run into the snowy woods to hide from potential intervention. While Pilgrim was sneaking into his son's hospital room to forgive him for needing to be whipped for stealing a candy bar. Did I mention the whipping barrel yet?
I don't think so.
So Pilgrim had a barrel outside the cabin that he would strip his children and bend them over so that he could whip them on and off for hours. I mean, hours.
Yeah.
He would whip them, tell them to stay there, and then come back and whip them again when he got angry about something. Anyway, while Pilgrim was forgiving his son for needing to be whipped and warning him not to say anything untoward, the state troopers were called to the hospital on suspicions of abuse. Each family member present was interviewed separately, but they all told the same story of Abraham falling down a set of stairs at the homestead. During all of this fuckery, Abraham's finger was unable to be saved.
Oh, no.
Bobby could see the frayed strands holding his family together coming undone. They were in mutiny. This would only make him bring the hammer down harder. He held them hostage. He beat them, coaxed, and coerced them into listening. The three eldest boys were off working in town. Fucknuts had a tight hold on Elisheba, knowing she had a plan to skedaddle. Everyone was encouraging her to go. They could see that Papa was on the verge of killing her if she didn't get away. He had beat her bloody for just asking a question. I mean, swollen black eye, fat lips.
And for being, I know he hid them away, but for being so involved in the community, I'm a little...
The community did eventually start catching on, especially their close neighbors, the Buckinghams, because Elisheba would show up beaten.
Right.
And he would keep her at the homestead. So they had 410 acres. And they did do farming, and if she was broken and bloody, he would send Karina down or one of the other girls. Because at this point, I believe Elishaba's 22.
Oh.
So,
and just, I'm assuming, not allowed to leave.
Not allowed to leave if she's not looking too good. Papa had given up on his sons coming home, saying they were lost to the devil and not welcome back to taint the rest of the family. This was good news for him because now he could be more open about his relationship with his daughter Elisheba. He would proudly display bruises on her and was much less subtle about their secret affair, conditioning the young for it to be normal and planning on taking the other sisters when they came of age, already grooming the 15-year-old sister Jerusalem. Despite not wanting to leave, she knew she had to escape and she began to formulate a plan. The family had run low on gasoline, making it necessary for Papa to head to town for more. He urged Karina and the children to watch Elisheba and not let her leave. Instead, they helped her flee. The vehicle they had planned to take didn't work. She steeled herself against the elements and trekked down to get a snow machine to drive to a rendezvous point with her brothers. Jerusalem and Psalms are also with her. Elisheba is smart. She blends her tracks with the others left behind to hide them from her father. Papa came looking for them, though, through the quiet streets as they waited to meet with brothers who never showed. Elisheba was racked with worry about the siblings left behind and the double MIA of her brothers. She decided they would trek down to the Wanagan, an outbuilding on their property, but they would have to walk in their stocking feet to avoid the crunch of the snow that could be heard by their sneaky father. They wanted to use the phone in the Wanagan, but sure enough, Pilgrim was there. They hurried back to their hiding spot. Following morning, they would seek out Glen Allen. They discovered there had been confusion over the rendezvous point, and the brothers rushed to collect them. They would seek refuge in their neighbors, Jim and Martha Buckingham.
You had me worried there for a second. I was like, where the fuck are these brothers?
were they murdered? Were they? No, there
Why
was
didn't they
some
show
confusion.
up?
Yeah. Oh, like they're just, fuck you, sister. We're
Yeah,
gonna come
that's what
get
I was
you.
like, excuse me.
No, the brothers were really working hard to get not just Elishaba, but all of the children out of there. They were
Good.
finally tired of all this. So now they're at the Buckinghams. As the siblings rode to Palmer, they concluded they would not reveal the worst of the abuse, fearing the interference of child welfare services and the wrath of Pilgrim and the breakup of the family. They had hoped that real consequences would wake Papa up to treating them like humans. Fat chance, because when they had called their mother he was taking a bath with 15-year-old Hosanna, Joseph flew up to the compound and stole her away too. Elishaba was still badly bruised from Papa's brutal beating 3 days earlier, so there wasn't much they could hide other than the sexual abuse. The Buckinghams welcomed her warmly, telling her she could stay as long as she needed, and though she was 29, not 22, 29,
Wow.
and couldn't be forced to press charges, she certainly might want to consider it. It is hard for a child to go against their parent, even in a healthy relationship. Can't imagine what it would be like in such a domineering one.
Yeah.
Over the course of several months, Buckinghams would collect as many Hale children as they could. The elder girls would cook and work in the garden, slowly learning that they could trust Jim and Martha, though the Buckinghams had a hard time trusting the elder Hale boys, fearing them to be like their father. They didn't want them around their young daughters, which is understandable.
I can understand that, yes.
Eventually, they did come around and cautiously let the boys around the family.
I can understand it.
No, I mean, I completely.
You literally were programmed to fuck kids. Like,
Well, the older boys, not so much.
I mean, they grew up around it.
Yeah, well, sort of. Started when Elishaba was 18, and they kept it very secret. There were suspicions, but never outright,
Okay, yeah.
like, confirmation. They were mostly tired of being beaten and whipped and subjugated. Back at Hillbilly Heaven, Papa Firefly was having a hell of a time bringing order to his chaos. Without Elishaba's guiding hand, the children would not fall in line. He was shocked that the visit he had conceded to let Hosanna have with her sisters turned out to be an escape. He called Joseph, claiming kidnapping. Joseph simply replied, then call the troopers. You could go to jail for what you did to Elishaba. Pilgrim maintained that she was 18 and she had consented, bullshit, and Pilgrim would not confess, but he didn't call the troopers either. Pilgrim was making plans to flee Alaska, but had overstayed his welcome in most of the communes of the Southwest. Still dirty, angry, and immature, he beat his youngest Jonathan once again for accidentally hitting Lamb with a rock. As time went on, Pilgrim was brought up on charges of kidnapping, incest, and sexual assault. Sometime along the way, the government they didn't drop their charges. That was a whole different thing. Robert Allen Hale was convicted of his crimes and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Due to his ill health, he would rapidly decline and shirk his sentence, succumbing to death on May 24, 2008, at the age of 67. The funeral was private, with only the Hales and Buckinghams attending. Karina recounts that the driver had to leave and wait by the hearse, as he had not heard so many people wish the dearly departed an eternity of damnation.
Whoa.
Now I would like to read some of the statements from the trial. Rose read, "On the outside, we looked quaint and could be quite charming when it suited us. But behind closed doors, a battle was always raging. Life wasn't easy in a small cabin with a husband who always made life sound so different from what you thought it was. He demanded complete attention when he spoke, and he could go on for hours. Sometimes he would not allow me to feed the children their breakfast until way after lunchtime, because he had so many things to say about the Bible. The children learned to sit almost motionless, like in a trance, while listening to him. The boys said they were trained to take beatings. They turned the other cheek and never dishonored their father by fighting back. He began to teach the family that if we sin, we do not go to heaven. He tried in every way he could to convince us that he himself was not a sinner, and that if we perceived that he had done something wrong, we could be sure that he was doing something God had told him to do. It took me a long time to grasp this doctrine, but the children were taught it from the time they could talk, so they always lived in fear of what it meant. As she described how he punished her for showing disrespect, she broke down weeping. She apologized, saying that she had never been able to speak of it and such things in his presence without fearing for her life. Words cannot express how women like me need others to reach out and help us in our desperate situation. How different our lives would be if I had made a friend to reach out a helping hand. I have asked God and my family to forgive me for not making more of an effort to get help. After thanking those who did help bring them out of the wilderness then came the children, starting with Bethlehem, who managed only a few words before crumpling into tears. Unlike their mother, they spoke directly to their father. Much of what followed was a plain description of life inside the family, which one of them called an occult. The anger, the drinking, the braided thong, the scriptural support for stealing, poaching game, and lying to authorities. Some carried written statements that Rachel Gernot read aloud. The way the older boys stumbled as they tried to read their own simple words was perversely eloquent. Each child carefully included a request that their father forgive them for some past moment of pride or disobedience, or for holding bitterness in their hearts. Each apology was a reminder that this might be their final exchange, their moment to say goodbye. I would try to get my sisters to do bad things, so you'd like me as a special one, said one of the little girls. If she was bad, he forced her to do push-ups under the family table until she fell asleep. Another of the little girls said, "I remember how on my birthday you held me for a very long time in your lap. I have been trying to get that out of my mind for a very long time." Father sat silently in his wheelchair at the defense table, scribbling furiously on a gray legal pad. He looked healthier than at his early hearings. The older children spoke of their embarrassment at being unable to read and do math, and at people knowing about all of their father's sins. Jerusalem, who had learned to swiftly read, described her childhood and the shock of going out in the world. "I would get on my knees at night and cry in my pillow and ask Jesus to show me the big miracle that was supposed to happen in my life. I thought I was going to be a new person and feel a natural desire to do what was right. There are no words to describe what it means to think you are better than everyone else in the world, and to find out that you know nothing, can do nothing, and aren't appreciated for what you can do because no one lives that way anymore. Plus, all of the bad character that we learned from our primary examples is character that has to be changed. It has been very confusing to think back on memories and try to discern what really happened. So often a story would be carefully told as how you would think it should be, and we all told it over and over again until we believed that it really happened that way. Please forgive me for not taking a stand because of the fear that gripped my heart. I believe we all would have taken a stand earlier, but we were all under your spell, just as a small mouse trapped in the glaring eyes and swaying head of a poisonous snake." Her older brothers told about the years of beatings and the whipping barrel. They expressed terrible remorse over their ignorance and fear. They were astonished now that the confusion had held them outside of the door. They were astonished now at the confession that had held them outside the door of the Wanagan, listening to their sister's screams. Joshua grimaced and lost control, trying to apologize. "I don't know what possessed me. I beat my chest and weep," he cried, as his voice rising an octave as his family in the gallery burst into loud sobs. Finally, it was Elishaba's turn. Cowgirl seemed transformed by 2.5 years away from hillbilly heaven. She wore a long pink patterned dress with maroon sleeves and a white lace collar, her dark hair pinned neatly back. Even some of her Texas twang had fallen away. Reading from a statement and looking up periodically to elaborate, she addressed her father directly. "I have tried so many times to tell you about the deepest concerns in my heart, about the things done in secret, things that I have felt were wrong, things you insisted were right before God. My eyes have been opened just like Eve in the garden when she bit into the apple and her eyes were open to her nakedness. When my eyes were open to the truth of my relationship with you, I found myself naked and unclean before God and before man. As you knew it would, this truth devastated me. You took for yourself the very things that I had held so dear. You knew that I wanted so badly to be pure and godly and to make it to heaven. In fact, you encouraged that spirit in me and then turned around and used my desire to be right before God to get your own way with me. I was just a little girl, and I wanted to please her papa." Elishaba spoke of growing up in the mountains and of the punishments and the false picture their family presented to the world. "All your life I've watched you twist the truth of things to always make yourself be the one in the right. If you could manage to shift the blame on someone else, you would feel you had won a great victory. Woe it be the one who ever accused you of anything. They would be sure that you would turn the table around and they would be the one who would look guilty in the end. You carefully made your signs and visions, which you used on me whenever I would show the least bit of resistance to your physical advances. You would remind me that God was the one that approved of our relationship, and yet to me it often seemed like you would just make up the vision of the forethought of needing to use it later to get your own way. Of course, I would never have dared speak my doubt openly, because you said to question you would be the same as blaspheming against the Holy Spirit of God, and that would be a sin that could never be forgiven. There was no end to the ways you could think of to punish me for not meeting up to your physical demands. It seemed like you would do anything to find an excuse to beat me. In my weakest state, I would always end up giving into the pressure to once again meet your sexual desires. You got a sick delight in looking at all the bruises you had put on me when I resisted you. You would boast of what you had done, as if there was some secret delight in being able to overcome my resistance. All this you did in the name of God and love." The next morning, Robert Hale got his chance to speak. This time he arrived with no Bible and asked for one. The judge said he had no Bible at hand, and neither did Richard Payne. The prosecutor leaned into the gallery to consult quietly with the family, then responded that no one had an extra Bible to lend. Hale opened anyway with prayers. "Lord, reveals the truth, untie the knot that's hidden so many things." Then in a soft, mournful drawl, he started to unspool one last time the long, sorrowful odyssey of Papa Pilgrim, starting with his heroic father and the accidental death of his teenage bride. Soon he was blaming Rose for the problems in the nostalgic, regretful tone. "I realized at some point I was probably the only one in the family who knew God." His love for his wife had been greatly quenched, he conceded, because of all the sins she had allowed her children to commit. Yeah, right until the end, he blamed everybody but himself.
Bitch.
He paused and wept at the memory. He had never given anything but mild corrections, and only out of fatherly love. "I can hardly believe the lips of my children using words like beat unmercifully, he said. No one ever complained of the harsh conditions back in New Mexico. Reading and writing had been his wife's responsibility. It's like there's this whole thing of blame everything on Papa," he said. "The only brainwashing he could see has come from the Buckinghams, who had coveted his family from the start. He felt really sorry for Jim Buckingham, for he would reap what he had sown. For more than 2 hours, Judge Hopwood interrupted to say he needed to finish up. Hale began grabbing at ideas with wide eyes of a drowning man. He warned the children they risked hell for the sin of bearing false witness. My biggest concern is their salvation. They're not going to be able to stand before my Lord Jesus. He went on to quote 1 Corinthians and question how a court of unbelievers could ever be a proper forum for admitting sin. He sang a verse of sorrowful family song about lost lambs coming home. He said his children's accusations of abuse would get him killed in the jail's open population. My family's actually signed my death warrant yesterday. He said Elisheba had committed perjury before the grand jury and lied before God about the correction he gave her in the Wanagan. He hadn't meant to slap her. He had just pushed her away, and the wood stove door was hanging open to the flame, and sometimes you hit the wrong place on an eye and the whole face goes black. He said Scripture foretold how Christians would be imprisoned in the last days, their very families turning against them. Everyone who wants to live in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. There's just no other way about it. That's what carrying the cross is, and that's where I am now. All of the Hale children have gone on to heal with the help of the Buckinghams and various community members. Elisheba has written a book, Out of the Wilderness, that chronicles the suffering she went through in her early life. And that is the very condensed version of the Alaskan Hale family cult. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word condensed.
That was a pretty good story, but there's that is also kind of gross. I have not had time due to school for a sip of stupidity, so I feel like we're going to skip a Rooney that one today, folks.
All right, that's fine. No palate cleanser. Anyways, thanks for tuning in and listening to our ramblings on true crime and other miscellaneous macabre. If you like this episode, please leave a rate and review. It really helps to get the word out there. If you'd like to interact with us, you can find us on all the socials at Don't You Know Pod or on our website, don'tyouknowpod.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and don't forget to lock your doors.